Cayce identified 3 nations that will test humanity's future. Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine you could peer beyond the veil of time, past the headlines that fill today's news, past the political divisions that seem to tear our world apart, and glimpse the deeper currents that are actually shaping humanity's destiny. What if I told you that decades ago, a man in deep trance state saw exactly where we are today, that he identified 3 specific nations, 3 centers of power, whose choices in our lifetime would determine whether humanity ascends to a golden age of consciousness or descends into an era of unprecedented chaos. This wasn't political speculation. This wasn't economic analysis. This was spiritual reconnaissance into the very forces that are orchestrating our collective future. The man who received this vision never claimed to be a prophet. He was simply Edgar Cayce, a photographer from Kentucky who could access information that seemed to come from beyond ordinary human awareness. And in his most profound readings about world affairs, he revealed something that should make every conscious person pay attention. 3 nations, 3 tests, 3 opportunities for humanity to prove whether we're ready for the next phase of our evolution. These aren't random countries caught up in the sweep of history. According to Cayce's vision, these are spiritual testing grounds, places where humanity's deepest values will be challenged, where our capacity for wisdom, compassion, and unity will be measured against forces of fear, greed, and separation. The choices these nations make, the paths they choose, the consciousness they embody, will echo through generations. They will determine whether your children inherit a world moving toward peace and enlightenment, or one trapped in cycles of conflict and spiritual darkness. But here's what makes this vision even more extraordinary. You are not just a witness to this unfolding, you are a participant. Your consciousness, your prayers, your very thoughts about these nations and their leaders, they matter more than you might imagine. There are moments in history when certain individuals become doorways, openings through which higher wisdom enters our world. Edgar Cayce was such a doorway. For over 4 decades, this humble man from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, would enter a sleep-like trance and speak with a voice that seemed to come from beyond personal knowledge. While his body lay still, his consciousness would travel, gathering information from what he called the Akashic Records, the cosmic library where all knowledge is stored. Most people know Cayce for his health readings, his ability to diagnose illnesses and prescribe remedies for people he had never met. But what fewer people realize is that his gift extended far beyond individual healing. When asked about the destiny of nations, the rise and fall of civilizations, the great currents of history itself, the sleeping prophet's accuracy was breathtaking. He predicted both world wars before they began. He foresaw the stock market crash of 1929. He spoke of the end of communism in Russia decades before it happened. He described the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, the development of lasers, changes in climate patterns that we're witnessing today. But perhaps his most profound gift was his ability to see nations not just as political entities, but as living souls with their own karma, their own spiritual lessons, their own evolutionary purpose. In reading after reading, Cayce revealed that countries, like people, have consciousness. They have collective thoughts, shared emotions, group karma that must be worked through. Some nations carry the energy of service and healing. Others embody lessons about power and its right use. Still others serve as testing grounds where humanity's spiritual maturity is measured. And in some of his most remarkable sessions, particularly readings 9441 and 397615, Cayce identified 3 specific nations whose spiritual development would determine the trajectory of human consciousness itself. These weren't the largest countries, they weren't necessarily the wealthiest. but they were the ones whose choices would ripple through the collective soul of humanity, either lifting our species toward its highest potential or binding us to patterns that would delay our spiritual evolution for generations. The sleeping prophet saw these nations as humanity's great teachers, each one presenting us with a fundamental test that we must pass to graduate into planetary consciousness. Take a breath and expand your awareness for a moment. Think about the energy you feel when you're with certain people. Some individuals radiate peace and leave you feeling uplifted. Others carry anxiety that seems to fill the room. We intuitively understand that people have different vibrational signature, different qualities of consciousness that affect everyone around them. Now imagine that this same principle applies to entire nations. According to Cayce's vision, countries are more than geographical boundaries or political systems. They are collective souls, groups of millions of people whose shared thoughts, beliefs, and intentions create a unified field of consciousness that extends far beyond their borders. Just as individuals have karmic lessons to learn and spiritual gifts to offer, so do nations. Some countries embody the energy of innovation and progress. Others carry ancient wisdom that needs to be preserved and shared. Still others serve as catalysts, their very struggles and conflicts forcing the rest of humanity to examine its own values. This isn't mystical theory. You can feel it when you travel. There's something unmistakably different about the consciousness of different lands, the way people think, what they value, how they treat each other and the earth itself. But here's what Cayce revealed that was truly extraordinary. In this particular era of human history, these crucial decades we're living through right now, there are three nations whose spiritual development will determine whether our entire species moves forward into an age of peace and enlightenment, or remains trapped in cycles of fear, division, and spiritual unconsciousness. These three nations represent humanity's greatest tests, not military tests or economic tests, but consciousness tests. Tests of whether we can transcend nationalism while honoring healthy patriotism. Tests of whether we can hold multiple nations in our hearts without choosing sides in ways that create more separation. Each nation embodies a different aspect of the human soul that must be healed and integrated. Each one presents us with choices that will reveal whether humanity is ready for its next evolutionary leap. And the profound truth that Cayce revealed is this: their destinies are not separate from yours. The consciousness you hold about these nations, the prayers you offer for their leaders, the vision you maintain of their highest potential, all of this becomes part of the collective field that actually influences their choices. You are not just watching this unfold, you are helping to write the story. Let's begin with the most surprising prophecy of all. If someone had told you in the 1940s, during the height of the Cold War, that Russia would eventually become humanity's hope for spiritual leadership, you might have questioned their sanity. This was the land of Stalin's purges, atheistic communism, the Gulag archipelago that imprisoned millions of souls. And yet, in reading after reading, Edgar Cayce described a future Russia that would astonish the world, not through military conquest or political domination, but through the development of a consciousness based on genuine spiritual principles rather than material power. Cayce saw something extraordinary in Russia's spiritual DNA. He saw a nation that had suffered so deeply, had its people tested so severely by hardship and oppression, that they would eventually emerge with a profound understanding of what truly matters in life. Out of Russia's darkest hours would come a light. Out of its greatest trials would emerge wisdom. The sleeping prophet foresaw a time when Russia would begin to embody what he called Christ consciousness on a national level, serving other nations rather than seeking to dominate them, sharing resources rather than hoarding them, leading through example rather than through force. This doesn't mean Russia was destined to become a Christian theocracy. Cayce's vision was far more profound than that. He saw Russia developing a consciousness that transcends religious labels, a national commitment to spiritual principles that could inspire the entire world. But prophecy is not predestination, and today, as you observe Russia's actions on the world stage, you might wonder whether this vision is actually unfolding, or whether it represents a potential that may never be realized. Here's what Cayce understood that most political analysts miss. Russia's soul is engaged in an epic struggle between its past patterns of control and fear, and its destined role as a spiritual teacher for humanity. Every choice its leaders make, every policy decision, every interaction with other nations represents a moment in this great internal battle. The test for the rest of us is profound. Can we hold space for Russia's highest potential, even when its current actions seem to contradict that vision? Can we send light to its leaders while honestly acknowledging their shadow behaviors? Can we recognize that a nation's spiritual evolution, like an individual's, often involves periods of regression before breakthrough? Your consciousness toward Russia matters more than you know. When you hold fear-based thoughts about this nation, when you see only its darkness and ignore its potential for light, you actually contribute to the collective field that reinforces its shadow patterns. But when you can hold the vision of Russia's spiritual destiny while remaining realistic about its current challenges, when you can pray for its leaders to choose service over selfishness, you become part of the force that helps this nation fulfill its prophetic purpose. Russia's test is whether it will choose the path of spiritual leadership or remain trapped in outdated patterns of dominance. Humanity's test is whether we can support that choice, even from a distance, through the power of conscious awareness. Now let us turn our attention to a nation whose spiritual testing is perhaps the most visible and the most crucial of our time. America, the great experiment in democracy and freedom, the land that has served as a beacon of hope for millions, and yet has also cast shadows of materialism and exploitation across the world. Cayce's vision of America was complex, nuanced, filled with both tremendous promise and sobering warnings. He saw this nation as humanity's great laboratory for discovering whether people of different backgrounds, different beliefs, different dreams could actually live together in peace while maintaining their unique identities. But he also saw America's fundamental spiritual test. Would it live up to its founding ideals of liberty and justice for all? Or would it become just another empire that pursues power over principle, wealth over wisdom, control over compassion? The sleeping prophet recognized something profound about America's soul. This is a nation built on an idea, the radical notion that people can govern themselves, that individual freedom and collective responsibility can coexist, that diversity can be a source of strength rather than division. But ideas must be lived to remain alive. And in reading after reading, Cayce warned that America's greatest danger would not come from external enemies, but from internal spiritual bankruptcy, from forgetting the consciousness that gave birth to its highest ideals. He saw America at a crossroads that would determine not just its own future, but humanity's capacity to believe that freedom and equality are actually possible on Earth. Today, as you witness the divisions in American society, the political polarization, the struggle between those who want to expand freedom and those who want to restrict it, you are watching this prophetic test unfold in real time. America's soul is engaged in a battle between service and selfishness, between being a lighthouse that inspires other nations toward their own freedom, or becoming a fortress that protects its own interests while ignoring the suffering of others. Every election, every policy decision, every cultural shift represents a choice point in this great spiritual testing. Will America choose to embody the consciousness that declares all people are created equal? Or will it retreat into fear-based tribalism that divides people into us and them? But here's what makes this test even more profound. America's spiritual development doesn't just affect Americans. Because of its global influence, its cultural exports, its economic and military power, America's consciousness choices ripple through every other nation on Earth. When America operates from its highest spiritual principles, when it leads through moral authority rather than military force, when it uses its abundance to lift up rather than exploit, it gives permission for other nations to do the same. But when America acts from fear, when it prioritizes short-term gain over long-term wisdom, when it uses its power to dominate rather than serve, it actually makes it harder for other countries to choose their own path of spiritual evolution. Your role in America's test is not partisan. It's not about supporting any particular political party or ideology. It's about holding the vision of America's highest potential while honestly acknowledging its current limitations. It's about praying for leaders who will choose principle over politics, wisdom over winning, service over self-interest. It's about refusing to participate in the fear-based thinking that divides Americans into enemies, while still standing clearly for justice and truth. America's test is whether it will fulfill its spiritual destiny as humanity's model for conscious democracy. Our test is whether we can support that evolution, regardless of our nationality, through the power of love rather than judgment. The third nation in Cayce's prophetic vision presents perhaps the most complex and fascinating test of all. China, the Middle Kingdom, a civilization that spans 5,000 years, whose philosophers and sages gave humanity profound teachings about balance, harmony, and the art of living in accordance with natural law. And yet today, China stands at one of the most crucial crossroads in human history, facing choices that will determine whether ancient wisdom can coexist with modern power, whether a nation can embrace technological advancement while honoring spiritual truth. Cayce saw something unique in China's spiritual DNA. Here was a culture that understood the interconnectedness of all life long before Western science discovered quantum physics, a people who developed practices like Tai Chi and Qigong that harmonize body, mind, and spirit, a civilization that created the I Ching, the Tao Te Ching, philosophical treasures that reveal the deeper patterns underlying all existence. But the sleeping prophet also saw China's great challenge. Would this nation use its rising influence to share its ancient wisdom with humanity? Or would it abandon its spiritual heritage in pursuit of material dominance? Today, as you observe China's emergence as a global superpower, its technological innovations, its economic expansion, its growing influence in world affairs, you are witnessing this prophetic test unfold in real time. China's soul is engaged in a profound struggle between two different visions of power. One vision sees power as dominance, as the ability to control others through surveillance, censorship, and force. The other vision sees power as service, as the capacity to contribute wisdom, healing, and balance to a world desperately in need of all three. The sleeping prophet understood that China's spiritual contribution to humanity could be extraordinary. Imagine a superpower that operated according to Taoist principles, that sought harmony rather than conquest, that used its influence to help other nations find their own balance rather than forcing them into submission. Imagine a global leader that embodied Confucian ideals of virtuous governance, that prioritized the long-term well-being of all people over short-term political gains, that saw its role as cultivating wisdom rather than accumulating wealth. This is the China of Cayce's highest vision, a nation that would help humanity remember what it means to live in harmony with the Tao, the natural order that governs all existence. But prophecy presents potential, not certainty. And today, China faces the same temptation that has corrupted empires throughout history, the belief that might makes right, that power gives the right to impose one's will on others, that winning is more important than wisdom. The test for China is whether it will choose to be a wisdom keeper for humanity, sharing its profound understanding of balance and harmony, or whether it will become another authoritarian empire that prioritizes control over consciousness. And the test for the rest of us is whether we can encourage China's highest spiritual expression while honestly addressing its shadow behaviors. Can we appreciate the depth of Chinese philosophy while standing clearly against oppression wherever it occurs? Can we hold space for China's spiritual evolution while refusing to enable its authoritarian tendencies? Your consciousness toward China, like your awareness of Russia and America, contributes to the collective field that influences this nation's choices. When you can hold both appreciation for China's ancient wisdom and concern for its current human rights violations, when you can pray for its leaders to choose the Tao over tyranny, you become part of the force that helps China fulfill its prophetic potential. China's test is whether ancient wisdom can guide modern power. Humanity's test is whether we can support that integration through conscious awareness rather than fearful opposition. Here is where Cayce's vision becomes truly extraordinary. These three nations, Russia, America, and China, their destinies are not separate. Their spiritual tests are not independent. According to the sleeping prophet's deeper insights, their evolutionary paths are intricately woven together, each nation's choices affecting the other's capacity to fulfill their highest purpose. Imagine three instruments in a cosmic orchestra. When one plays in harmony, it makes it easier for the others to find their proper notes. But when one produces discord, it creates interference that affects the entire symphony. Russia's spiritual development influences America's capacity for true leadership. When Russia chooses service over dominance, when it operates from spiritual principles rather than fear-based control, it actually makes it easier for America to do the same. It removes the excuse for defensive nationalism and creates space for both nations to focus on their highest purposes. Similarly, America's integrity affects China's willingness to share its ancient wisdom. When America leads through moral authority rather than military force, when it demonstrates that power can be used to serve rather than dominate, it gives China permission to embrace its role as wisdom keeper rather than authoritarian controller. And China's balance impacts Russia's ability to choose spiritual leadership over political manipulation. When China demonstrates that a major power can honor spiritual principles while remaining strong, it shows Russia that true strength comes from consciousness, not coercion. But the web of influence works in both directions. When any of these nations chooses its shadow expression, when it operates from fear, greed, or the desire to dominate, it actually makes it more difficult for the others to access their light. This is why current global tensions are so spiritually significant. The conflicts and competitions you observe between these nations are not just political or economic struggles. They are manifestations of a deeper spiritual battle, the testing of whether humanity is ready to evolve beyond tribal consciousness into planetary awareness. Each crisis between these powers, each moment of cooperation or conflict, each choice between competition and collaboration serves the larger purpose of determining whether our species can learn to live as one human family while honoring the unique gifts of different cultures. Cayce saw this interconnection as both humanity's greatest challenge and its most promising opportunity. The challenge is that if one or more of these nations fails their spiritual test, if they choose fear over love, domination over service, materialism over wisdom, it could delay humanity's spiritual evolution for decades or even centuries. But the opportunity is unprecedented if all three nations can align with their highest spiritual potential, if they can learn to work together as conscious partners in human evolution rather than unconscious competitors for earthly resources. They could catalyze a golden age of peace and enlightenment that transforms life for everyone on Earth. The question that haunts this prophetic vision is profound. What happens if one or more nations fail their tests? What occurs when the instruments of the cosmic orchestra play in discord rather than harmony? And perhaps most importantly, how can conscious individuals like yourself help ensure that these tests become opportunities for breakthrough rather than occasions for breakdown? Now, we come to perhaps the most empowering aspect of Cayce's vision. You might assume that the destinies of nations are determined entirely by their leaders, their governments, their political and economic systems. But the sleeping prophet revealed something that should change how you think about your role in world affairs. The thoughts, prayers, and intentions of ordinary people worldwide actually influence national consciousness. And through that consciousness, they affect the choices of leaders and the direction of policies. This isn't wishful thinking or spiritual fantasy. According to Cayce's understanding, consciousness is a field that connects all minds, and changes in that field create measurable effects in the physical world. When millions of people hold fear-based thoughts about a particular nation, when they see only its darkness and imagine only worst-case scenarios, they actually contribute to the collective mental atmosphere that makes it more likely for that nation to manifest its shadow qualities. But when people can hold the vision of a nation's highest potential while remaining realistic about its current challenges, when they can send light to its leaders while standing clearly for justice and truth, they become part of the force that helps that nation evolve toward its spiritual destiny. This means your daily consciousness choices matter more than you might imagine. Every time you read news about Russia, America, or China, every time you discuss these nations with friends, every time you form opinions about their actions, you are participating in the collective thought field that influences their future choices. Fear-based consciousness breeds more fear. Judgment creates more separation. Hatred generates more hatred. But love, wisdom, and the vision of highest potential create energetic space for nations, like individuals, to transform. This doesn't mean becoming naive or ignoring genuine problems. It means developing the spiritual maturity to hold both light and shadow in your awareness, to see clearly what is while maintaining faith in what could be. Imagine what could happen if millions of conscious people around the world began to pray regularly for the leaders of these three nations, not for their political success, but for their spiritual development. What if you joined others in sending light to Moscow, Washington, and Beijing, visualizing these centers of power being surrounded by wisdom, compassion, and the desire to serve humanity's highest good? What if instead of consuming media that profits from fear and division, you chose to focus your mental energy on holding the vision of these nations' spiritual potential? What if you became someone who speaks about world affairs from hope rather than despair, who sees global challenges as opportunities for breakthrough rather than evidence of inevitable doom? According to Cayce's understanding, such consciousness choices are not just personally beneficial. They actually contribute to the morphic field that influences how these prophetic tests unfold. You are not a powerless observer of world events. You are a conscious participant in humanity's spiritual evolution, and the quality of consciousness you bring to your awareness of these three nations becomes part of the cosmic force that determines whether they fulfill their highest destiny or remain trapped in their shadow patterns. The question becomes, what kind of influence do you choose to be? Take a moment to consider the extraordinary timing of your life. You were born into the precise historical moment when Cayce's prophetic vision would be tested. The period from 2020 to 2040, these crucial decades we're living through right now, represent the culmination of spiritual forces that have been building for generations. This isn't coincidence. According to the sleeping prophet's understanding, souls choose their incarnation timing carefully. You are here now because your consciousness is needed for this particular phase of humanity's evolution. Every global crisis you've witnessed, every moment of international cooperation or conflict, every election, revolution, or social movement serves the larger purpose of testing whether our species is ready for its next evolutionary leap. Consider the events of recent years through this prophetic lens, the global pandemic that forced every nation to choose between fear and wisdom, between isolation and cooperation, the rise of authoritarianism in multiple countries testing whether humanity will defend freedom or surrender to control, the climate crisis that demands unprecedented international collaboration. These are not random challenges, they are the inevitable playing out of spiritual forces, the testing of whether nations can transcend their separate interests and work together for the common good of all life on Earth. Russia's choices during this period, whether to embrace its role as spiritual teacher or cling to patterns of dominance, will determine its influence for decades to come. America's decisions, whether to live up to its founding ideals or retreat into fear-based nationalism, will affect every other democracy on Earth. China's path, whether to share its ancient wisdom or impose its authoritarian model, will shape how power is understood and wielded throughout the 21st century. But here's what makes this timeline convergence truly remarkable. The outcome is not predetermined. Every day brings new choice points, new opportunities for breakthrough or breakdown, new moments when the consciousness of individuals like yourself can tip the balance toward light or shadow. Cayce saw this period as humanity's great initiation, like an individual soul facing its most crucial spiritual test. Our entire species is being asked to prove whether we're ready to graduate from tribal consciousness to planetary awareness, from competition-based survival to cooperation-based thriving. The fire of testing serves a purpose. It burns away illusions. It forces nations, like individuals, to choose their deepest values. It reveals which leaders will rise to serve their highest calling and which will succumb to their lowest impulses. And through it all, your consciousness remains a constant influence. Every meditation where you hold the vision of humanity's spiritual success, every prayer you offer for world leaders to choose wisdom over winning, every moment when you choose love over fear in your own thoughts about global events, adds to the collective force that helps these prophetic tests become opportunities for unprecedented breakthrough. The timeline is converging, the tests are intensifying, but the potential for transformation has never been greater. Your presence here now in this crucial moment of human history is no accident. You are part of the solution. Now let's make this deeply personal. You might wonder how your individual consciousness could possibly influence the destiny of nations with hundreds of millions of people. You might question whether your thoughts and prayers could really affect leaders in Moscow, Washington, or Beijing. But according to Cayce's understanding of how consciousness works, your spiritual development is not separate from global transformation. They are the same process occurring at different scales. Every time you choose love over fear in your personal relationships, every moment when you respond to conflict with wisdom rather than reactivity, every instance when you see the highest potential in someone who has disappointed you, you are practicing the same consciousness that needs to emerge at the national level. Your inner work becomes outer work. Your personal healing contributes to planetary healing. Your individual spiritual evolution adds to the collective field that influences how these prophetic tests unfold. This means your daily choices carry global significance. When you meditate, when you pray, when you practice forgiveness, when you choose to see difficulties as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for despair, you are contributing to the morphic field that makes it easier for entire nations to make similar choices. Consider establishing a simple but powerful practice. Each day, spend a few minutes sending light to the leaders of Russia, America, and China. Not light for their political success, but light for their spiritual development. Visualize these individuals surrounded by wisdom, guided by compassion, inspired to choose service over selfishness. You don't need to agree with their policies or ignore their shadow behaviors. You're simply contributing to the energetic field that makes it more likely for them to access their highest potential. Imagine Vladimir Putin, Joe Biden, and Xi Jinping, each surrounded by light, each guided by the understanding that true power comes from serving humanity's well-being rather than advancing narrow national interests. See them making choices that surprise the world with their wisdom and generosity. This isn't naive optimism, it's spiritual technology. It's the practical application of Cayce's understanding that consciousness creates reality, and that your individual awareness contributes to the collective field that influences global events. You can also contribute by becoming someone who speaks about world affairs from a place of spiritual maturity rather than political reactivity. Instead of getting caught up in the drama of conflict between nations, you can help others see the deeper spiritual testing that's occurring. When friends express fear about global tensions, you can acknowledge their concerns while also sharing the vision of these challenges as opportunities for breakthrough. When media promotes despair about the future, you can choose to focus your attention on evidence of consciousness evolution rather than evidence of collapse. Your role is not to fix the world. Your role is to hold steady faith in humanity's ultimate spiritual destiny, to be a lighthouse of consciousness that helps others navigate the storms of change with hope rather than despair. Remember, you incarnated at this exact moment in history because your unique blend of consciousness is needed for this particular phase of human evolution. Your prayers matter. Your vision matters. Your faith in humanity's potential to transcend its current limitations and evolve into something magnificent. This matters more than you know. Take a deep breath and let yourself step back from the political noise for a moment. You might feel overwhelmed by the divisive rhetoric that surrounds discussions of these three nations. In today's media environment, it often seems impossible to have nuanced conversations about Russia, America, or China without triggering strong political reactions. But here's what you need to understand. The prophetic vision we're exploring transcends political categories. It's not about which country is good or bad, which political system is superior, which leaders deserve praise or condemnation. It's about recognizing that every nation, like every individual, has both light and shadow expressions. Every country carries both gifts and challenges, both potential for service and temptation toward selfishness. Russia has contributed extraordinary literature, music, and spiritual wisdom to humanity. and it has also imposed suffering through authoritarian control. America has inspired the world with its ideals of freedom and opportunity, and it has also caused harm through materialism and military interventions. China has given us profound philosophy and remarkable innovations, and it has also suppressed human rights and individual freedoms. The spiritual test is not about choosing sides in these contradictions. It's about developing the maturity to hold both aspects in your awareness simultaneously, to appreciate each nation's gifts while honestly acknowledging their shadows, to pray for their evolution without enabling their dysfunction. This requires a level of consciousness that goes beyond the binary thinking that dominates political discourse. It requires the ability to love without being naive, to hope without being unrealistic, to hold vision without ignoring facts. When you can look at Vladimir Putin and see both the authoritarian leader who has caused genuine harm and the human soul who could potentially choose a different path, you are practicing the consciousness that can actually help transform global affairs. When you can acknowledge America's history of racial injustice and economic exploitation, while also holding faith in its potential to fulfill its founding ideals of liberty and justice for all, you are contributing to the field that makes such transformation possible. When you can recognize China's current human rights violations, while also honoring its ancient wisdom traditions and their potential contribution to planetary healing, you are helping create space for that nation's spiritual evolution. This nuanced awareness is not moral relativism. You can still stand clearly against oppression wherever it occurs. You can still advocate for justice and truth, but you do so from a place of spiritual maturity rather than reactive judgment, from love rather than hatred, from the vision of what's possible rather than fixation on what's wrong. The political mind wants to make enemies. The spiritual mind wants to make possibilities. Your consciousness toward these three nations can be a force for possibility rather than enmity. This doesn't mean becoming passive or avoiding difficult conversations. It means bringing a quality of awareness to global affairs that transcends the limitations of partisan thinking, that sees the soul-level testing occurring beneath surface events, that holds steady faith in humanity's capacity to evolve beyond its current patterns of conflict and separation. Now let me speak directly to the part of you that might feel discouraged by the state of the world. When you read the news, when you see reports of international tensions, conflicts, and crises, it's natural to feel overwhelmed. It's human to wonder whether the world is falling apart, whether humanity is doomed to repeat cycles of war and suffering, whether there's any real reason for hope. But here's what the mainstream media doesn't understand about the current global situation. What looks like chaos from one perspective can be seen as birth pains from another. According to Cayce's prophetic vision, the tensions and challenges we're witnessing are not signs of inevitable doom. They are the necessary passages that humanity must navigate to evolve from tribal consciousness to planetary awareness. Think about the process of birth. It involves pain, struggle, and moments when everything seems to be going wrong. But that difficulty serves a purpose. It's the mechanism through which new life emerges into the world. Similarly, the global crises of our time, the conflicts between nations, the challenges to democracy, the struggle between different visions of human organization, these are the contractions that are helping to birth a new level of human consciousness. Every crisis contains the seed of breakthrough. The pandemic that seemed to divide the world also revealed our fundamental interconnection. The rise of authoritarianism has awakened millions to the value of freedom. The climate crisis is forcing unprecedented international cooperation. Even the tensions between Russia, America, and China, as difficult as they are, serve the spiritual purpose of testing whether humanity can evolve beyond the belief that one group's success requires another group's failure. The sleeping prophet understood something that most political analysts miss. Conflict often precedes integration. Chaos often precedes breakthrough. The darkest hour often comes just before dawn. Your role in this process is not to fix the world's problems through activism alone, though service has its place. Your most important role is to hold steady faith in humanity's ultimate spiritual destiny, to be a lighthouse of hope in a world that desperately needs people who can see beyond current appearances to future possibilities. When others despair about global tensions, you can remind them that these challenges are temporary, that they are serving the larger purpose of helping our species mature spiritually. When media reports focus only on what's going wrong, you can choose to look for evidence of what's going right. Signs of consciousness evolution, examples of leaders and nations choosing wisdom over winning, service over selfishness. This isn't about denying real problems or pretending that everything is fine. It's about developing the spiritual perspective that can hold both current challenges and future potential and awareness simultaneously. Remember that Cayce's prophecies about these three nations are not predictions of inevitable outcomes. They are descriptions of potential timelines that become more or less likely based on the consciousness that humanity brings to these tests. Your hope matters. Your faith matters. Your vision of a world where nations work together in service of all life. This vision contributes to the morphic field that makes such a future more probable. You are not just observing history. You are helping to create it through the quality of consciousness you maintain in the face of global challenges. Step back now and see the larger pattern that's unfolding. What we've been exploring together, these prophetic insights about three nations and their role in humanity's spiritual evolution, this is ultimately the story of our species' graduation test from one level of consciousness to another. For thousands of years, human civilization has been organized around tribal thinking. Us versus them, my group versus your group, my nation's interests versus other nations' interests, competition for scarce resources, the belief that one group's success requires another group's failure. This consciousness served a purpose during humanity's childhood. It helped us survive, organize, and develop the skills and technologies that brought us to where we are today. But now we face challenges that cannot be solved through tribal consciousness. Climate change affects everyone regardless of nationality. Nuclear weapons threaten all life on Earth. Economic systems have become so interconnected that what happens in one country ripples through every other nation. We have reached the point where our survival as a species depends on our ability to think and act as one human family, while still honoring the unique gifts and perspectives of different cultures. This is the graduation test that Russia, America, and China represent. Can major powers learn to use their influence in service of planetary well-being rather than narrow national interests? Can they model cooperation rather than competition? Can they demonstrate that strength comes from consciousness rather than coercion? If these three nations can align with their highest spiritual potential, if Russia can become the wisdom teacher Cayce envisioned, if America can fulfill its role as freedom's lighthouse, if China can share its ancient understanding of harmony and balance, they could catalyze humanity's evolution into a species capable of interplanetary cooperation and universal service. But if they remain trapped in old patterns of fear, greed, and domination, if they continue to see each other as enemies rather than partners in human evolution, they could delay our species' spiritual development for generations. The outcome depends partly on their leaders' choices, partly on their citizens' consciousness, and partly on the global field of awareness that people like you contribute to through your daily thoughts, prayers, and intentions. This is why understanding these prophecies transforms you from a passive observer of world events into a conscious participant in humanity's destiny. You now know that your individual spiritual development is not separate from global transformation. You understand that your prayers and meditations actually influence the morphic field that affects how these tests unfold.